She had been strangled. She had also been sexually assaulted. A very brutal, senseless killing.
This 6-year-old kid who was saying that he saw these horrific acts being perpetrated upon his mother by Danny Brown.
Then he pointed at me. And he said, "Did that man kill your mother?" And he shook his head, "Yes."
Danny did it.
This child had been completely rehearsed and prepared.
Good job, sweetie. Very good.
And he came back and said, "Well, I'm arresting you for this murder." I said, "I ain't do it."
You have the right to remain silent.
Danny Brown was convicted based on the word of a very confused and frightened 6.5-year-old boy.
Everybody knows he didn't do this except the DA's office.
He got life, 15 to life.
It's hard. Real hard.
He's locked up forever, and he didn't do it.
Just one day he's there, one day he's gone.
I never thought it could happen to me, but it did.
The U.S. has the largest prison population of any country in the world, a total now topping 2 million, equaling the size of Houston, Texas, America's 4th largest city. Studies indicate as many as 5.7% of those inmates, or 100,000 citizens, are wrongly convicted. Of those, 60% are Black.
The major cause of the wrongful convictions is faulty human memory, faulty eyewitness testimony. It's thought to be implicated in maybe 75 to 80% of known cases of wrongful conviction.
Danny Brown of Toledo, Ohio, was one of those cases.
When I was initially convicted, I just kept making these thoughts, projections in my mind. Like, first it was 6 months. I'm gonna get out in 6 months. It went to 1 year to 2 years, then from 2 years to 5, and from 5 years to 8, from 8 to 10. And before I knew it, it was like 19 years that I was in prison. I knew I was gonna be found innocent, but just a matter of the time. How long would it take them to do the right thing?
Danny's story begins in December of 1981. Ronald Reagan was president. Diana Ross and Lionel Richie topped the charts with Endless Love. And 39-year-old Muhammad Ali came out of retirement for a losing bout against Trevor Berbick. In Toledo, Ohio, the Sunday morning of December 6, 1981, was typically windy and cold. At 11 a.m., residents of a Birmingham Terrace apartment heard a small knock at their door.
Jeffrey, what are you doing here by yourself, man?
I think there's something wrong with my mommy.
An investigation of the neighboring premises led to a horrifying discovery.
Bobby, are you okay?
What the detectives and the police officers saw when they entered the apartment was Bobby Russell lying on her stomach with a ligature around her neck. It was an extension cord that had a wooden object that was used to sort of tighten it around her neck. She had been strangled. Bobby Russell had been raped anally, and the speculation or the theory was that that happened after she was unconscious. The medical examiner found that there were a couple of lacerations in her vagina. She had been assaulted with a broomstick. Very brutal, senseless killing.
Bobby Russell's killer left behind 3 very young survivors.
I was around 3 years old when my mother was murdered. I was at home at the time when the crime took place. I believe we were in the bedroom at the time. My sister, she was with me, and my older brother, he was with me.
Sandy's brother, 6-year-old Jeffrey, was hiding under his sister's bed when the murderer came upstairs.
He walked upstairs in our bedroom and tried to attack us. That I was struck in the face. There was a hanger around my neck when the police and the paramedics arrived.
Remarkably, the children survived the attack. Toledo police began a manhunt for their mother's killer.
I met Bobby Russell when I was helping the lady that stayed next door to her move from one apartment to another. Then we struck up a conversation, and I got her number, and we started talking. It wasn't really dating. I was young, and it was more casual. I knew her for about 2 months, and I visited her about 4 times. I had just got out the military, and I was just having fun back then, and I was just hanging with family and friends.
In my family, there was, including me, 8 children, and Danny was the second oldest boy. When I was growing up, Danny was almost like another father for me. He was protective, he talked to me a lot, he gave a lot of advice, and my brother was fun, easygoing, everybody loved him.
But for 24-year-old Danny Brown, things were about to change when he learned about the death of the woman he was casually involved with.
I was watching the news, and I saw this, they was talking about Barbara Russell was killed in the Birmingham Terrace, and me and Brenny was sitting in the dining area. And I looked at him, I said, man, that's the girl I was messing with right there. But I ain't think nothing other than that, but that it was tragic. You know, it was messed up. But I never thought nothing beyond that at that point. And so when I called, my mom said, Danny, what did you do? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, the police was here. I said, I ain't do nothing. She said, well, they said you beat this girl up. I said, I didn't. So, you know, I put 2 and 2 together, that they thinking that I killed this woman, this lady, Bobby Russell. And so after we talked, I hung up and I looked at Brenny and I said, hey, I need you to take me downtown to the police station.
Trusting that he could clear things up, Danny voluntarily reported to the Toledo Police Headquarters, where he was met by Detective Art Marks.
Danny Brown. And he started talking to me. He asked me to tell him where I had been from Friday night to Sunday night.
Can you account for your whereabouts over the weekend?
I was with friends.
And he was asking me questions like, what did you do? Give me the exact time. I said, I'm not sure. He looked at my arms. He looked at my body for scratches or cuts or something, or abrasions. There was none.
Danny gave Detective Marks the names and numbers of 3 alibi witnesses with whom he spent Saturday night. His friends were called in, immediately separated, and individually interrogated for hours. They all supported his story. Danny arrived at the home of Patrick Porter early in the evening. They talked, hung out, had a few beers, and watched sports on TV.
We was there all night, and so was Danny. There's got to be some kind of mistake. There's no way Danny would do something like this.
Danny'd spent the night, along with several other friends who'd crashed at the house on Parkwood Avenue. Over the evening, more than 30 people saw or spoke with Danny.
By 10 o'clock, we all went to McDonald's. Danny, too. Hell, even the people there seen him with us.
During the interrogations, it became clear that police based their suspicions on the testimony of Jeffrey Russell, the 6-year-old son of the murdered woman.
Ain't no way he killed Bobby Russell.
I got an eyewitness who says he did.
Who said that?
Her son, Jeffrey. He saw the whole thing.
This young boy did seem to seize upon the idea that Danny was the perpetrator, and to do so fairly soon after the murder.
Take your time, son.
To show a set of photos that include Danny and then a bunch of strangers and ask, you know, can you pick him? I mean, it's a strange kind of identification. It's kind of meaningless because you don't know whether he's identifying Danny because he knows him, or he's identifying him as a person who might have committed a crime.
Danny's friends refused to accept Jeffrey's identification.
While he was interviewing Patrick Porter, Patrick said, bring the boy in, let's have a lineup.
If he saw everything, bring him in.
I said, yeah, let's have a lineup. Let's do it then. Because I wanted to see that this boy was saying that I did it.
Detective Art Marks immediately brought 6-year-old Jeffrey Russell to the police station to physically identify his mother's killer. A mini lineup was formed consisting of Bobby Mosley, Patrick Porter, and Danny.
Then he brought the little boy in the interview room, and he was holding him, and he pointed at Bobby, and he said, did that man kill your mother? And the young child shook his head no. And he pointed at Pat. He said, did that man kill your mother? And he shook his head no. Then he pointed at me. And he said, did that man kill your mother? And he shook his head yes. And at that point, I was just stunned.
Jeffrey, why are you saying that? When was the last time you even seen me, Jeffrey? Jeffrey!
I think I said, why are you saying that? To him, to the child. The officer still had the child in his arm. I said, why are you saying that? Excuse me. It's hard. Real hard. I was really hurt. I was devastated. I know I didn't do it, but I know the officer was convinced to make it that I did it. And I was trying to understand why the boy was saying it.
One of the things that we know about children is even with adults, you can ply them with suggestion, you can ask them leading questions, and you can contaminate their memory. But when you're dealing with a young child, then the problem is even more acute. It's even easier to, even inadvertently, suggest things to the child and to see the child incorporate those suggestions into his recollection.
Then he came back and said, well, I'm arresting you for this murder. And I said, I ain't do it. I said, please keep looking for the real perpetrator. And he looked at me and said, well, we're gonna try you for this, and we're gonna see who the jury believes, your witnesses or this little boy.
Danny was booked on rape and aggravated murder charges, transferred to the Lucas County Jail, and put in a holding cell.
I was getting more anxious because I had knew the history of police departments across the country when it came to African-American men. I never thought it could happen to me, but it did. Even though I knew I didn't do it, I always had the hope that I was getting out. I also had the anxiety of, like, I'm about to be a victim.
In 1981, 24-year-old Danny Brown of Toledo, Ohio, was implicated in the brutal rape and murder of Bobby Russell. Russell's 6-year-old son, Jeffrey, identified Danny as the killer, and despite pleas of innocence and a strong alibi, Danny Brown was charged with the crime.
Even though I knew I didn't do it, I always had the hope that I was getting out. And as time was seeping, I became more anxious about the situation because I knew it was getting more serious.
Without money for his defense, Danny was assigned a court-appointed attorney, John Richardson.
Thanks for taking my case. I just want you to know, first off, I'm innocent.
Listen, you don't need to tell me. I've read the police reports and their case is a sham. I just need you to tell me everything you can about where you were and who you were with on the night of December 5th, okay?
The first time I went to the jail to see Danny, he simply did not understand how he could be there. The system was beginning to go wrong already. And it was, to say it was confusing that's an understatement.
As Danny's attorney became familiar with the details of the prosecution's case, one thing became apparent.
The case rose and fell on Jeffrey's testimony. There's this child, this 6-year-old kid, who was saying that he saw these horrific acts being perpetrated upon his mother by Danny Brown, whom he knew. The obvious approach was to discredit Jeffrey as gently as possible, because you don't bully a 6-year-old kid in front of a jury.
Before Jeffrey could testify in court, due to his age, he had to be deemed competent.
Under Ohio law, a person is deemed to be competent under 10 years old after an examination by the judge. The law reads that they have to understand the meaning between truth and lies. And they have to show some knowledge of the incident that they would be testifying to.
If you were going to talk about something that happened a little while ago, would you tell the truth, Jeffrey?
Yes.
And do you know when you don't tell the truth?
Yes.
We call that lying, don't we?
Yes.
During the defense questioning, Jeffrey's moral compass seemed way off.
Did the prosecutor, Mrs. Franks, teach you what the truth is and what a lie is?
Yes.
Did your mother ever teach you that?
No.
So, before this hearing today, and before all of this, you had not learned that, had you?
No.
This was all new to you, wasn't it?
Yes.
It became obvious that this child had been completely rehearsed and prepared by the prosecutor. The other thing that was revealed in this competency hearing is that the child was confused about a lot of factual details.
He said that he could see out the window upstairs and saw Danny leaving. He couldn't see out that window. The window was too tall for him. He said it was summer and it was the dead of winter. And I pointed out to him that it just simply wasn't possible. And he said, oh, I guess I messed up on that one, didn't I?
Jeffrey's performance at that trial, to me, was anything but to the standard what the law was set out to be. And I won't say that his law, I think that he's a child. And he was just doing the best that he could do as a child.
Despite Jeffrey's confusion, inaccuracies, and shaky understanding of the truth, Judge Petrikowski ruled him competent and eligible to testify.
I was really devastated at that point again. And what was happening, I think the prosecutor, because she decided to bring the charges, was getting every benefit of the doubt. But I as the defendant, wasn't getting no benefit of the doubt.
Even the Lucas County prosecutors knew that Jeffrey's testimony alone might not be enough for a conviction.
The state didn't, as I recall, didn't have anything physical from the scene at all. Danny wasn't there.
They had nothing. They had no prints. They had no biological fluids, no nothing.
Before the case even got to the grand jury, the charge of rape had already been dropped.
They were worried that I or someone like me would say, well, how do you know that sex wasn't consensual? Just because there's semen doesn't mean that that was a forcible rape. And so a safer theory from their point of view was that the killer came into the house unannounced and uninvited and committed murder.
After being held for over 9 months and on the eve of his trial, the prosecution offered Danny a plea bargain, cop to a manslaughter charge, and avoid a life sentence.
It carries a term of 1 to 10, and with time served, Danny could be out in as little as 3 months.
3 months, Danny. It's a pretty sweet deal.
There's nothing sweet about it if I didn't do it.
It's 1 to 10 years. And since you've been in jail for 10 months, you can get, when the year roll by, you go to parole board in 3 months, and you possibly can get out within 3 months. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not saying I did that. I'm not going to plea bargain.
Danny was so committed to his innocence and to the fact that we were going to fight this out, that it was almost an insult to take him any kind of a bargain.
With the cards stacked against him, Danny Brown was prepared to risk his freedom to clear his name. Despite a strong alibi, along with no physical evidence linking him to the murder of Bobby Russell, and after sitting in jail awaiting his trial for 9 months, Danny Brown of Toledo, Ohio, was about to go on trial for a murder that he swore he knew nothing about.
When Danny was arrested, it drastically affected the family. It mentally broke my mother to the point where she had to be hospitalized on more than one occasion. It financially destroyed them.
During the trial, my family was there, my grandmother was there, a bunch of my friends. They had the courtrooms just filled with my family and friends at that time.
From day one of the trial, prosecutor Ruth Ann Franks went after Danny by focusing on the brutal sexual aspects of the attack.
They turned around from the very beginning of the trial and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this case involves rape." And from that moment on, that's all she talked about.
The defendant took Bobby Russell's underpants and sodomized her.
Now, she was accusing me of rape, but they hadn't charged me with rape.
The state's position at trial was that the person who raped Bobby is the person who killed her.
Prosecutor Ruth Ann Franks walked her primary witness, 6-year-old Jeffrey Russell, through his hazy recollection of the crime.
When you went downstairs, did you see anything?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you saw? What did you see?
Danny.
Jeffrey was a beautiful child. He was just a sweet, wonderful kid to look at. He was all those things, and he was wrong.
Jeffrey claimed to see events downstairs while hiding upstairs beneath his sister's bed. He admitted to confusing his facts and being mistaken.
But the jury, even though he admitted he was wrong, they were still being fed that he saw me. Even though it was already in the record that it was wrong, because the prosecutor was saying Jeffrey saw him.
Despite numerous inconsistencies, when Danny's defense attorney cross-examined Jeffrey Russell, he had to handle the boy with kid gloves.
You cannot bully a 6-year-old kid. I mean, unless, if you want to just lose the trial right then.
So you're saying he went across the room and snapped the leg off the chair?
Yes.
You sure about this?
Yes.
You were up in your mother's room throughout this whole thing, though, weren't you?
Yes.
If the prosecution case rested on Jeffrey, the defense relied heavily on Danny's alibi witnesses, beginning with Danny's cousin, David Harris.
Do you remember helping to clean up a house on Bell Street last winter?
Yes.
Who helped you?
My cousin, Danny Brown.
About what time did you get done?
I don't know the exact time.
Thank you.
They was drilling me, and I was actually a nervous wreck because I'd never been in a situation like that. I just told them the truth and everything that I knew.
Jerome Brooks, a close friend, was one of many who testified as to Danny's whereabouts.
I was with Danny that night at my grandma's house over on Parkwood.
There was a lot of people there at the house. It always is in that house. All of them testified to the fact that Danny was there at the night that they say he had proposed to have committed this crime.
Maybe over more than 30 people saw me that night on December 5th, 1981. 13 of the people that I saw that night testified as witnesses.
If Danny said, I was at the Ohio State-Michigan game and I was sitting with the Pope, and so there's 105,000 people who can say where I was, starting with the Pope, that might have undone Jeffrey. But short of that, that jury was in love with that kid. And alibi witnesses be damned. They believed Jeffrey.
It would be interesting to know why the jury was so willing to forgive the inconsistencies in Jeffrey's testimony. I'd be curious whether there were some jurors in the jury room saying, well, we have to expect that there might be a little bit of a confusion in a young child, but basically what they say is accurate and truthful.
The jury deliberated for just over 6 hours. When they returned their verdict, Danny knew his life was hanging in the balance.
I was really nervous. I didn't know which way it could go.
If the jury believed Jeffrey, that was it. Danny and I knew that Jeffrey had held up. Jeffrey did not break down on the stand and say, okay, maybe I'm wrong. And it was just an awful, awful moment.
Read the jury in the above entitled
When the lady
action
stood
to
up
find Denny Brown guilty.
and they said guilty, I think I was standing up. And I think I flopped down on the chair and my head just hit the table.
Danny turned to me and said, John, this is wrong. That's all he said. And I said, I know it.
It was like we lost a loved one. He's locked up forever, and he didn't do it. It was terrible.
I turned around. Everybody was crying. I seen my friend's wife crying. You know, I was crying, they was crying, and I was devastated at that point.
The word devastated is the right word. I was absolutely, I was destroyed by that verdict. He got life, 15 to life.
It was strange because he sentenced me right there, on the spot.
You know, he was looking at perhaps the rest of his life in a cage for something he didn't do.
I couldn't believe that the people had just done this.
The savage murder of Bobby Russell in December of 1981 led to the arrest and conviction of 24-year-old Danny Brown, who never wavered in declaring himself innocent of the crime.
Judge Pietrkowski just sentenced him from the bench. He got life, 15 to life.
Danny was sent to the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, a legendarily harsh and violent prison the inmates simply call Lucasville.
Oh my God. The roughest place in the world. Lucasville was a hard prison when I went there.
Lucasville, like any prison, was a hotbed for inmate conflict and violent upheaval.
There was a lot of tension, a lot of stabbing. That's what they did. It was less fighting and more stabbing. It just was violent people. They didn't care about life. In a minute, they could kill you because you said the wrong thing or you did the wrong thing.
Danny endured hard conditions and sometimes fatal encounters that were all too often the norm.
The guards killed an inmate. They locked the place up. They went in and beat this guy, and stepped on his neck and broke his neck. Then the inmates fighting each other or coming after each other. Tension is there.
Facing possible decades in prison, Danny held to his innocence.
I was telling people I was innocent, and everybody was like, man, that's all he talk about, he innocent.
So what are you in for? I was railroaded. My trial was a joke.
They want to believe you're guilty too. They want to believe you just as bad as them. They want to believe that you're a liar.
Even though his odds were slim to none, Danny wouldn't give up. The first step was becoming his own lawyer.
And I would go to the law library. I read. And you reading this and they using Latin words and they using French word, whatever. They use Latin. And they use these big words. And I would take a dictionary and look at the words I didn't know, because that's how the law is. It's not something that you can digest easy.
Months in the law library drifted into years. Danny continued to study and file appeals on his own behalf.
Danny became a real student, a student of the law. He read and he studied and he filed things on his own, which was remarkable and laudable.
You know, and I was putting my issues, I put them so plainly and clear, and I was arguing pretty good.
Unfortunately, they didn't have any legal impact. It didn't change anything.
As far as the law was concerned, his case was over. He was a forgotten man, a convicted killer facing a life behind bars. He was desperate for any means to plead his innocence. That's when he learned of Centurion Ministries.
I got acquainted with Centurion Ministries by watching a TV program about a guy named Jim McCloskey, who was the founder of Centurion Ministry. He helped free a guy from prison.
Our mission is to identify and investigate cases where we believe a man or woman has been wrongly convicted, meaning that they're absolutely innocent of the crime for which they've been convicted and sentenced to life or death. Each year we get 1,100 requests for help, but each year we take on 2 to 3 new cases. That's like hitting the lottery.
They rejected me, but I kept writing them, just kept writing. And so one day, a lovely lady named Constance Veland answered me and said, I'm gonna look at this and let's see what we have here. I began sending her material. We began a correspondence as friends.
Constance was a psychologist in the local Princeton school district system, recently retired. And she got hold of the trial transcripts. She read them carefully. She presented a very compelling case for Danny's innocence. So I reread everything that she had read and came to the same conclusion that Constance did, namely that Danny was a completely innocent man, and this was a bad conviction.
Jim McCloskey got on the plane, came to Lima, Ohio, to visit me and tell me in the visit room, we're going to take your case based on the DNA evidence.
Your conviction is so wrong on so many levels.
Now, we saw his case obviously having DNA exoneration potential.
During Danny's trial back in 1981, DNA testing didn't exist. Locating DNA from Bobby Russell's autopsy could identify her true killer. But what were the odds that the Toledo police still retained physical evidence from a case nearly 2 decades old?
Is it possible, is it even thinkable that they have Bobby Russell's DNA, or the DNA from Bobby Russell at the autopsy? Because if that's true, if it still exists, it could clear Danny.
After serving 19 years of a life sentence for a murder he insisted he didn't commit, Danny Brown, now 41 years old, had exhausted all his appeals. Prison was taking its toll, both on Danny and his family.
I actually had times when I gave up hope. And that's a bad thing to happen to a person in prison. I would wake up 3, 4 in the morning and I would be crying. I would be saying, why? Why?
I remember he called from prison one day, and he was talking to my mom, and she was crying and upset, and I just had enough.
And my sister snatched the phone, was like, what you doing to my mother? And I was like, what the heck are you talking about?
I was like, quit calling here, upsetting my mother, I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of her crying. I'm tired of her being upset.
I didn't know what was going on. It made me feel so bad that she had to go through this. I mean, I know it was terrible for her.
Danny Brown needed a miracle. It came from the benevolence of a woman named Constance Veland.
She believed that I was innocent, did a report, and got Centurion to take my case.
Jim McCloskey asked John Richardson, Danny's original court-appointed attorney, to track down the nearly 20-year-old DNA evidence that could clear Danny's name. Sperm samples taken from Bobby Russell's body were what he needed.
I called the coroner's office. I said, do you have the slides? Because they make slides from it. No, we don't keep that stuff. I tried the prosecutor's office. And we went down in the basement and got out the the exhibits from the trial to see if maybe those slides were in there somehow. No.
Ironically, Danny Brown's own sister, Vicky, broke the case.
I mean, I wanted to do anything I could to free my brother. I called the coroner's office and I asked, is there any samples left from this murder? And she said she would get back to me. It took a couple of days, and she called me back and said we had the fluid samples.
They found it in the refrigerator, low after all these almost 2 decades of time. I wanted it to be sent to a private lab. However, Julia Bates, the prosecutor, they wanted the state crime lab to do it.
That scared us to death. What if it comes back inconclusive and there's no answer?
The one person who wasn't afraid was Danny Brown.
That part wasn't her, because I knew it was in it. That was like, okay, well, now they doing it. So, okay, shoot, this is going to be over with now.
The testing took 3 months. When the results came back, they were conclusive. The sperm found in Bobby Russell's body did not match Danny Brown.
When we found out that the DNA didn't match him, we were just not surprised. We were just elated because we knew he was going to be free.
This clearly exonerated him. He should have walked out of prison within the next week, as had happened in other DNA cases of ours across the country. But no, that wasn't good enough for them, for the district attorney I'm speaking of. And so they insisted that Danny be given a polygraph.
Distrusting polygraphs, Danny's legal team brought in their own high-powered observer.
We went and got a guy named Lynn Marcy from Dearborn, Michigan, who's the best polygrapher there is. He trains the FBI's polygraphers. He had trained the polygraph guys in the Toledo Police Department.
They put me in a small room. They hooked me up. It was more like he was interrogating me. And he was being cool. I was trying to be calm. You try to be calm, because it works on your emotions, and you're supposed to get nervous. I wasn't really nervous because I know I didn't do it. I had bad nerve.
The exhaustive test was conducted on brand new state-of-the-art equipment and went on for hours.
We were just pacing up and down the corridor for that 2 or 3 hour period, nervous as cats. Danny's a highly emotional person, and those kinds of folks are not good polygraph subjects.
And the way that Jim and I knew that the test had not gone well is look on Danny's face. And he looked at us and said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Polygraph examiner says it was inconclusive. We can't do anything with it.
Lynn Marcy, the polygraph expert who'd been brought in as an observer for the defense, had a suggestion.
Lynn said, I'm going to do it myself on my old tried and true method, not this fancy new thing. I'm going to use the one I've trained 100 people on.
Readily acknowledging Lynn Marcy's expertise, the Toledo police polygrapher stepped aside for a second testing.
Okay, I'm in the county jail after the test. Jim and John Richardson come up in there, come in the room where I'm at. They said, we got some news for you. We have 2 things to tell you. You passed the polygraph test. And the second thing is the DNA came back and hit on another guy.
It belonged to a man by the name of Sherman Preston, who just the year before, the year 2000, had been convicted of raping or sodomizing, which the victim in Danny's case was sodomized, and strangling, which Bobby Russell was strangled as well, of another woman.
Sherman's MO is to kill someone physically, and then to burn the place where it took place, which is exactly what Bobby Russell's facts are. I mean, this guy tried to burn the house down.
They got him. I wanted that. Like, I wanted that more than anything. That they would find the guy who actually did it. That's what I wanted, so my name could be totally vindicated. So I'm like, this is over.
After 19 years, it appeared that Bobby Russell's real murderer was finally found. But Danny Brown's struggle to clear his name was still far from over.
13 witnesses, no physical evidence, lie detector tests and DNA. What does it take?
On the afternoon of April 9, 2001, after serving 19 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, Danny Brown was finally a free man.
I could just see from his expression when he looked around and came out like as if to say, without saying words, it's to say, I told you I wasn't guilty.
Stepping back into life as a free man was not altogether smooth. Danny faced the culture shock of a world that changed during his years of imprisonment.
When I got out, they had me a cell phone, I couldn't even hold it to my ear, and I was trying to figure out how to talk on it. I had it in my hand. I ain't never seen a cell phone before. I was in prison all those years.
But even though Danny Brown walked out of prison, he was not entirely free.
Danny's case was nullied, and basically what that meant was that the prosecutor at that point decided not to bring new charges against him, but he's still under investigation.
Nully is totally different from, hey, we apologize, we made a mistake, and we want to make amends to you, Danny. That didn't happen, though. I didn't get that apology that I so desperately wanted. I didn't get the compensation. If you do a record check on me, it'll come up that I was arrested for aggravated murder. So I always got to explain that to people, to employers, whereas the complete exoneration won't show that.
The prosecutor's reasoning for keeping the case open? Danny is still a suspect in the killing of Bobby Russell.
Once it became apparent to all concerned that Sherman Preston was the assaulter and killer of Bobby Russell, then they switched from a one-man perpetrator, Danny Brown, to a two-man assaulter or assailant of Bobby Russell.
Jeffrey had said on I don't know how many occasions that Danny was alone. Danny came and did this, Danny was by himself. He had said one time in a police report that there were two guys there. Danny doesn't know Sherman Preston, never heard of him. There is no connection between Danny Brown and Sherman Preston. Never was, never will be.
They never went after two people. They never attempted to charge anybody else. They never asked me, who were you with?
With no time limits on murder cases, Danny's legal limbo could drag on forever.
The prosecutor should fish or cut bait here. If she says that this case is still under investigation, finish the investigation and conclude it. Danny has said numerous times, if you think I did something, prosecute me. But don't just hold this case under investigation over my head for the rest of my life. I want my name cleared.
Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates declined to be interviewed for this program.
It's just our policy that we don't talk about pending cases and give details and discussions about cases that are still pending, and it still is.
I would love to see Lucas County get this matter resolved soon and very soon. I don't know of any investigation or further investigation in my mother's death.
There's no ongoing investigation. There's nobody's going looking to try to find out if Danny Brown and Sherman Preston were ever friendly, which they were not.
Even Sandy Russell accepts the impact of the DNA evidence in this case.
If the DNA shows up that Danny Brown is not the murderer or the rapist of my mom, then I do feel that Danny should be free. I do feel apologetic, and I do feel that Danny should have justice if he did not commit the crime.
If Sandy is saying that should be enough to clear Danny Brown's name, then that should be enough for Julia Bates as well.
Everybody knows he didn't do this except the DA's office. It's just dirty politics. They hold on to the conviction because they're simply afraid of the state being liable for millions, or the county really being liable for millions of dollars.
There is a statute in Ohio that allows for wrongly convicted individuals to get compensation for each year that they've been incarcerated. I believe that figure's $47,000 roughly per year.
At that rate, Lucas County is now withholding in excess of $900,000 from Danny Brown.
You go to jail when you're 25 and you come out and you're 44, and you have nothing to show for it.
In the years following his release from prison, Danny held down a series of menial jobs. Finding work was hard with a murder rap over his head, and he tried unsuccessfully to appeal his case. With no legal recourse available, Danny took his cause public on the steps of the Lucas County Courthouse.
Every day, Danny walked around that courthouse with his sign.
The sign said 13 witnesses, no physical evidence, lie detector test, and DNA. What does it take? My intent was to try to bring consciousness to the voters of Lucas County.
It appears to have been futile. I mean, the prosecutor's office isn't changing its position. The system has not responded to Danny's plight.
Danny still refuses to end his battle to clear his name.
He still has fight, he still has spirit. So long as you have that, you can go anywhere.
It's that spirit that sustained Danny for 19 years in prison. To this day, Danny doesn't regret turning down the plea bargain that would have gotten him out of jail in 3 months.
They offer me no time and just plead guilty right now today and same consequences. I tell them no. Again, right now, no. I'll never say yes that I did that. I ain't do it. That'll never happen. Never.